Hello and welcome to John Drama Paints. It is my pleasure to share with you detailed videos in which I show you exactly what I'm doing while doing it. In this two-part video series, I will show you how I painted the mushroom on Redkap's hood, as you can see in the picture right now. I hope you will be able to learn something from it, but if I go over some parts too fast or certain things remain unclear, please let me know and I will make sure to correct that in a later video. But for now, let's dive straight in and paint some minis together. Alright guys, welcome to part 2 of painting Redkap's hat. And in this video I'm gonna glaze, and I'll want to talk a little bit about glazing. I guess the aim of the video is to primarily talk about glazing and what you can do with glazing rather than to just solely glaze the hood together. So before we start actually applying the glaze, what is a glaze? As you can see here, I have a small palette and I put two colors in it. This is a staggered on scale green, and this is let me double check, this is Screamer Pink, and I've added a bunch of water to it, about 1 to 6, 1 to 7, 1 to 8 ratio of paint to water. So this is really, if I put some paper towels here, if I just take some paint on and I drag it off, really, as you can see, there's practically no paint left. And what I'm gonna do with these things is I'm gonna put it on the areas where I want blends to be smoother, and what it will do, it will help me blend those things together. So I'm just actually gonna start doing it while talking about what I'm doing. So as you can see, you still always want to take a lot off of your brush, and the most part, and simply go over it from the point, from like a halfway point, and drag it into the shadows. And as you can see, this is what I'll be doing here, and I'll be using two colors to shade these different colors together. And at first the effects will barely be noticeable because it's such a low amount of paint and a high amount of water, but over a couple of layers, one after another, the effect will start to build up. So what is a glaze? I almost dropped my brush there. What is a glaze actually, and what does it do, and how does it differ from other paints? Well, I guess it doesn't differ from other paints because you could turn almost any paint into a glaze, but by thinning it this way and applying it over areas that you want to glaze over, you're actually reducing the contrast between two areas. So what that means, if you want to blend, you want a very smooth transition from one color to the next, and what will happen if that blend is not very smooth? There will just be lines and things you'll see where the next color starts and where the other, where the one color starts and where the other ends and begins. So by glazing over those areas and reducing the contrast between those two colors, you're actually, by glazing, blending them together and reducing the contrast between those colors. So if you want to use this method to help you with your blending, keep in mind that by applying a glaze, no matter, almost doesn't matter which color, the contrast is reduced. So usually, if beforehand you know you're gonna want to use this technique, you want to go a little bit higher on your highlights because you know you're gonna bring them closer together in the end. This is well, I should say, I find this a very satisfying technique to use because it's not so difficult, and even if I go over some of the blue every now and again, there's such a small amount of paint on it, it won't really be noticeable that much. So you can do this and you can kind of zone out a little bit and just apply one glaze after the other and see your effect build up. So it's actually, I find it a very satisfying technique to use. However, If you do it too long without checking every now and again, just zooming out from the model and taking a look at your progress, you are at risk of reducing all the pre-work you've done. So like if you glaze too much and you reduce the contrast too much, you're just going to create equal planes. So every now and again, just put the model aside and have a look at it and see if you're happy with the direction you're headed. So here I'm going to do actually the same with the blue. I'm just going to go over it a couple of times. Also with the consistencies, you don't need to approach this with mathematical precision, because if you use too much water, the only downside to that will be that you're gonna need more layers of glazes, I wanna say. So it's if you don't know your paints very well and how thin they are to start with, so you're not so familiar with how much water you want to add, just add a little bit more to be safe. And if it goes too slow, you can always add a little bit more paint. So here already you'll see that, I don't know how well it will show on the video, that here it's a bit brighter and here it's starting to get a little bit darker. I want it a bit darker, but I'm also thinking about making this part even brighter, the highlight point. And that is also a nice part of glazing. And you can just go back and forth and you can go over it. You can, after you've glazed a little bit, you can go back to your brush and paint some details in. That's all possible. So don't be scared about that. And I actually want to encourage you to just use this technique in between or at the end. At the end phases, it's always nice so that you can finish and put the model down with like perfect or near perfect blends. But as I said, you can just go back and forth and play around with it, especially in the start if you're just discovering this technique and noticing what it can do for you, how effective it can be. It can be great fun to use it quite a lot. What I did in between from the last video, you might notice I painted the dots, painted them white, and also the bottom of the mushroom. So paints I used for that is I started with XV88, and then I added some iron rag skin over the course of like 2 or 3 layers, and I did some base paints on the pin, which I might glaze over with black just to blend those colors together as well. So here I'm using 2 colors to glaze, and I'm thinking about why I'm doing that is because I have 2 very distinct colors here, and if I glaze over it with over very light blue with screamer pink, that might not give me the effect I want. However, here what you could do is glaze towards the shadows with black. And I might actually show you what that would look like right now, just to give you an idea about how that would work. Because some of you might say, what? You're gonna use black to shade straight, just instantly go to black? Yes, because you're thinning the paint so much, it doesn't really matter. And you want it darker, and black is a good shadow color. Here you can see I just added some paint and just add some water to it. And then mix the paint together with the water. And as you see, I haven't really checked exactly the ratio, but it's a pretty high amount of water. And so what you'll get here now is again the same thing. So we'll have very diluted black, diluted with water. So if you go over it, it's barely noticeable. So you need to make sure your first glaze is dry before you go over it. But so if you are feeling a bit lazy and you just want to glaze, want to make all these parts a little bit darker, you can just glaze it down with black. As you can see, since it's such thin down, it won't affect it too much straight away. Another color that might have been a good choice for glazing into the darker parts here would have been the dark purple from Games Workshop. Let me check what's it's called. It's called Nagaroth Night. I like that color to glaze in shadows here as well. And even while I'm glazing, now I have black on the palette anyway, I'm gonna glaze over the metal pin a little bit. So technically, you can turn almost any paint in a glaze. I say almost any because I haven't tried it with all paints, but I wouldn't see why you couldn't do it with any paint. Maybe some technical paints that they they will provide difficulties for you. But even washes, sepia would actually be nice to glaze in the mushroom there. Add some more of that yellow. But regarding that, theoretically and also practically, you could glaze any two colors together. However, some colors are easier to glaze together than others. So, as a rule of thumb, just an advice from me, I would say that glazing darker colors or glazing together in the shadows is much easier than glazing together very light colors. So when you glaze, I would advise you to glaze from about your halfway point or a bit higher and glaze towards your shadows. And don't go over your very light highlights too strongly. So you can see here the side of the hood, the mushroom, is getting pretty dark. And even though I'm reducing the contrast, I am also increasing it between other areas. So between some elements, I'm reducing the contrast and blending them together. But because I'm making it darker here and staying away from that part, I'm also increasing the contrast between my shadows and my highlights. There we go. And as you can see, I'm actually quite satisfied with the darkness of the mushroom over there, but I would actually like it to pop a little bit more there. And for that, we're gonna go to painting. So stay tuned while I'll load up my palette and we'll just add some more highlights. Welcome back, guys, to the continuation after the glazing, where you can see now that it gets pretty dark in the shadows, but I think the definition here is still a little bit too broad, and I wanna define it a little bit better. So on my palette, I put on some Behrad Blue, some Empress Children, and some White Scar, or I think it's White Scar. I use for the white from the GW, I have some difficulties with it every now and again. So what I do is I use the air variant. It just serves me a little bit better. And here I actually chose Behrad Blue, which is different from the initial color that we used. So I'm gonna just double check if that is a suitable color for those final highlights to make the mushroom pop a little bit more. I think it'll do fine. It might actually still I might actually still want it a little bit lighter even. Make sure you don't go too far, because the whole idea is that my whole point of doing this and going back and doing this is that I went too wide on the highlights, so I wanna narrow it down. So I don't really want to go any further than this. And I'm gonna stick with the blue now, since I think I got a pretty good grasp on how far I went. So now I'll just add some White Scar to it and push it even further. And as again, we can go back. We have the glazes prepared that we've just used, so we can always reduce it. And here I wanna again try and be economical. The sparser you are with your highlights, the the stronger the overall effect, in my opinion, of the places is on the places when you use them. So I'm gonna push it even further. Of course, pure white is always your final highlight color. If you choose to go so high, you don't always need to go to pure white, but you can't really go brighter than pure white. All right, and with that, the contrast between the darkest part and the highlight point is really almost maximized, and that gives a really nice effect. I really like it. Even though they're not superbly blended together, we do have some colors on our different palette for glazing. So I might just use a mid-tone blue and see if I can glaze it together, just for the sake of the video, since this is primarily a video about glazing together, whereas now it also turned to a video that's a little bit about contrast and highlighting. So I started in between with Emperor's Children, but Emperor's Children doesn't give me a strong enough effect. So instantly I add some white scar, and I'm gonna define or push the contrast and push the highlight on the pink. And there we go. And it's starting. And the effect is starting to show right away. You want to try and be a bit careful at this stage. You don't make too many mistakes. All of it could be corrected even if you make mistakes at this phase, but it's just very frustrating if you spend a lot of time getting to this point and then you make a big mistake that you have to spend a lot of time cleaning it up. You see here, I spent very little time at the back, and I really, because I wanted to pop at the front, I'm gonna push it a little bit further. Again, as with the blue, almost to pure white. Personally, I don't like using pure white a lot or pure black. I will go pretty close to them, but I tend to stay away from the purest forms on my models, even though it would actually be good, because this is the highest point on the model, so that would catch the most light. So actually I could use it here, and does almost have that effect. For some reason I like to go to almost pure white and almost pure black, and avoid the purest. However, that is something for me to sometimes trust that I can push it a bit more. But you see the effect now. This is now the effect that I wanted is really starting to take shape. And you have that really the strong effect from the lighting, and it really hits it. It really hits it right where I wanted the highlight or the illusion. With that, I was saying, if you push your highlights to white a lot, you can do it, but even then I would recommend only using, as a rule of thumb, of course, pure white as your final highlight on the top half of your model. And when you go more down, I would stop before pure white. It might be a very small tip or a very small thing, but when I started doing that, I actually noticed a lot of effect from it. All right, so let me get back with the glazing pad, and we'll just glaze this together and finish this up. Okay, welcome back, and now it'll just take a very short time to finish off Redkap's cap. And as you see on the palette, I took Lauthern blue and just added a bunch of water to it and made it into a glaze. And here you see I've already tried to add a lot less water to it than I would to other colors, but since it's such a light color, you're gonna need less water to thin it down. Why I'm doing it is basically to show you that you can glaze with lighter colors, but it's just a little bit harder in my opinion. It takes a little more patience. Maybe it's just that I don't have it, but it'll just take a pretty long time to glaze together the colors that you want and get that nice transition. And here, since it's a lighter color, you don't want to glaze too deep into the shadows, but you also don't want to glaze over your the brightest point of your highlight, because there's always a pretty high chance of it staining, and that shows much better on light colors than on dark. That's why I said it's much easier to shade towards shadows or with darker colors than it is with lighter colors. Maybe easier is not per se the right word, but it's a lot more forgiving to do it that way. And just a couple of glazes, and the blend should be fine. Should be fine. So with this already, I think it's a pretty fine blend. You see, this is so thin that even though I wouldn't recommend it, here, since it's also not pure white, I don't think there'll be a very strong effect if I glaze over it. However, by doing this, I am taking away from the effect, since you're always reducing contrast. Now, sometimes I won't mind too much, because here I actually think it added just that little softening that will make the blend and the highlight come together a little bit nicer. I'm just gonna turn this one around, and for the purple, I don't really need a different color, so I'll just use the glaze that we had in here, which is Screamer Pink, and we'll just go over it real fast the same way we did with the blue. However, this time I will stay away from the brightest point, and I will try and drag the glaze into the shadows. There we go, and let's do it here as well. And why I did this as well, you could stop after the first part, because it wasn't that bad, even though I like the stronger highlight much better. But why I did it is to show you that you can just go back and forth between glazing and painting and glazing and painting. And over time, all those layers, they will start working together. So very often if people use just, John, what colors did you use? I can answer you, but since very often I use them in a weird combination, or in not always in the same order, I don't even always remember how many times I went back and forth. It is, even if I give you all the colors that I used, I rarely, it's very difficult to get the exact same effect. Now I go to black. Let me just add some black again to this one. For non-metallics, I assume this was a metal pin. And for non-metallics, you want to try and go for maximum contrast. As I said, it's not always easy for me. I'm trying to shy away from using pure black and pure white. Anyway, before this video gets too long, wait, actually, let me show you one more thing. Now that I have the Screamer Pink on my palette, I might actually also show you, you can just shade over many things. Since I did the purple, and on his face I went pretty light. So if I just go over his lower lip, that will actually define it a little bit better and give it that purplish glow. And so if you sometimes try and paint a very soft effect and it turns out very hard or very harsh, then keep in mind that very often it could be that people just painted it to a very light color and then just glazed over the hint of the color that they wanted the thing to be, in this case the lower lip. And you could also do it with the nose. It's a popular thing to give the gits or the goblins that the glowing red nose, or in this case the purple nose or the pink nose. And the same thing counts here. Just have some patience. Make sure that one layer is dry before you add the next. One glaze, I should say. There we go. Define the lip a little bit stronger. Wait for the nose to dry. And go over it again. As often as you want until you're happy with the effect. So this will probably be a pretty subtle effect because usually the face is a focal point. It will be for this model as well, but you'll notice that your attention, since we painted it so bright and so unusual, will go to the cap pretty fast. But after that, once you've seen the cap, you'll start exploring, and people notice the soft glow on the nose and hopefully also on the lower lip. Since I still have some paint on it, I want to define a little bit better. I like it subtle, but you don't want it so subtle that people can easily miss it, because you want people to notice all the details you paint, at least. That's what I want. All right, so let's do one more, and after that, we'll call this one, or this part of this model, done. All right. So with that, guys, we come to the end of painting Redkap's mushroom hat, and I hope you liked it. I hope I managed to teach you something. So let me know what you think, and let me know if some things were very unclear, or if they weren't, or if I can, you want me to focus on or go more in depth on some different topics, and I'll see if I can do that for you. So see you in the next videos, guys. Bye bye.